Morning, everyone. This is a recording of the talk I gave at breakfast this morning, 15th of August at Ezra United. Unfortunately, we didn't press the record button on the computer, so it wasn't recorded live, but I'm now going to do a recording of what I said this morning. So in last Shabbat Sidra of Re'eh, mention is made of the mitzvah of sudoka. Now, we know sudoka is one of the most widely observed mitzvot amongst Jewish people. Most homes have sudoka boxes, most communities have sudoka funds, and most homes are inundated with appeals for donations, especially around Pesach and Rosh Hashanah time. So it's a mitzvah which is ingrained in our Jewish belief and our Jewish traditions. Now, the halachot of tzedakah are quite detailed and are set out in the second volume of the Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh De'ah in chapters 247 to 259. So it's quite a lengthy number of laws outlining what we have to do, how we do tzedakah, etc. And the tzedakah laws was one of the topics that I covered in my Smicha program, and that's why I've decided to talk about it today. So last week said Re'eh in chapter 15 of Devarim, verse 11, there's a reference to the mitzvah of tzedakah. It says there, Ki lo yechtal evyo mikerev haaretz al kein anochi mitzavacha lemor patach tiftach et yadacha la'achicha la'aniyecha u'levyodecha ba'arsecha. For there will never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor and needy kin in your land. There's therefore a positive commandment to give tzedakah, to give charity to the poor. Now, the word tzedakah, which we use in Hebrew, is often translated incorrectly as charity. The word tzedakah comes from the word tzedek, righteousness, similar to tzaddik, a righteous man, or in modern Hebrew, the phrase ata tzodek, you are correct. So tzedakah is the right thing to do, and is both a positive mitzvah as set out in verse 11, as I mentioned, and also a negative commandment as set out a few pasukim earlier in verse 7. Because in verse 7, it says, Ki yevecha evyon me'echad achecha ba'achad sha'arecha ba'artzecha asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach lo ta'ametz et levavecha v'lo tikpotz et yadacha me'achicha evyon. If, however, there is a needy person among you, one of your kin in any of your settlements in the land that your God is giving you, do not hearken your heart and shut your hand against your needy kin. Therefore, when we give tzedakah, we are fulfilling one of the 248 positive commandments, and when we don't give tzedakah, we are transgressing one of the 365 negative commandments of the Torah. It's quite an important law which we have to keep. If someone refuses to give tzedakah, then the Beit Din of old had the right to force him or her to do so, even to take some of the offender's possessions to give tzedakah. So if there was a Scrooge in the community who refused to give charity, the Beit Din could send in the bailiffs, take his possessions in order to enforce him to give tzedakah. We don't have that today in our communities. Now, the English word charity comes from the Latin word caritas, which means love and compassion, and has been defined as an organization set up to provide help and raise money for those in need, or the body of organizations viewed collectively as the object of fundraising or donations, or the voluntary giving of help, typically in the form of money to those in need. The secular version of charity is therefore a voluntary, nice thing to do, whereas Jewish tzedakah is not optional, but is a religious obligation. By coincidence, Muslims also have an obligation of charity. They call it zakat or sadaqah, and is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Now, the Rambam, Maimonides, defines the 8 levels of giving tzedakah, from the highest form to the lowest form. So let's run through these now. The highest form of tzedakah is to help sustain a person before they become impoverished by offering a substantial gift in a dignified manner, or by extending a suitable loan, or by helping them find employment, or establish themselves in business, so as to make it unnecessary for them to become dependent on others. That's the ideal form of tzedakah. No money changes hands, but you are helping a person stand on their own 2 feet. The second level of tzedakah is giving assistance in a way that both the giver and the recipient are unknown to each other. So communal sudoka funds achieve that. You give money to the fund, and then the treasurers of the fund hand out money to needy people. So the recipient and the donor do not know each other. There's no embarrassment and no gloating involved at all. The third form is where the donor is aware who he's giving his money to, but the recipient is unaware of the source. So that could be achieved, for example, by putting an envelope of money in someone's letterbox. They don't know who's given it, but you know whose letterbox you put it into. The next level of tzedakah is where the recipient is aware of the donor's identity, but the donor doesn't know the identity of the recipient. So that could be achieved, for example, if, I don't know, you had a box outside your house with a key code with money in it, and someone in need could come and take money from that box, or take food, and you wouldn't know who's actually taken it, but they know whose house they went to get the money. The next form of tzedakah is when you give directly to a poor person without being asked. So you hand out money to someone or food, and the person hasn't asked you for it. The next form of tzedakah is when you've been asked to give the money and then you hand it over. So you've been asked, then you do it. The next form of tzedakah is when you give less than you should really do so, but you've done it with a cheerful countenance. So someone comes to your door to collect from the cells, they're poor. You invite them in, you give them a drink. Hello, how are you? Nice to see you. And even if you're just giving them 50p, which is not obviously not enough, but at least you've done it in a cheerful way and not embarrassed the person in any way. And the lowest form of tzedakah is when you do it grudgingly. So, for example, a schnorrer comes to your door and you ring the door and you go, oh no, not you again. You were here last week. I gave you money last week. What are you doing here again for? Oh, take this and go away, never come back again. Well, that's doing it with grudge. You've still performed the mitzvah of tzedakah, but you haven't done it with the right intentions. It's the lowest form of giving tzedakah. Now, there are many things we do in Judaism in our lives which can be considered tzedakah, even though they're not necessarily all monetary. For example, first of all, the ideal method of tzedakah, giving money to the poor, that's known, that's giving money to the poor. There's acts of gemilut chasadim, acts of kindness, like visiting the sick, comforting the mourners, burying the dead. That is also tzedakah. If you spend money on mitzvot, giving money to help schools, shuls, yeshivot, hospitals, etc., that is also tzedakah. In biblical times, where people farmed the lands, there was the system of masters where you had to give a tithe, a tenth of your money to charity or to the Kohen of Levim, etc. But in years 2 and 6 of the 7-year cycle, in years 3 and 6 of the 7-year cycle, 10% of your produce had to be given to the poor, maaser ani. There's also maaser kasafim, the tithing of your money, actually setting aside your money, designating money to give it to tzedakah. That is considered also a form of tzedakah. And then finally, giving your time, giving your professional time. For example, if you're a doctor, accountant, lawyer, dentist, whatever it is, a professional, and you actually gave your professional time free of charge to someone who couldn't afford to pay. That is also tzedakah. And in fact, the value of the time you've given can form part of your maaser, part of your money you set aside for tzedakah. But from that, you have to deduct 10% because you would, if you, for example, charge £250 an hour for your time and you gave an hour free of charge, well, had the person paid you £250, 10% of that, £25, you should have given to tzedakah. So only 90% of your time can be counted towards your tzedakah. The Shulchan Aruch sets out how much one should give to charity. It says that the absolute minimum one should give to fulfill your religious obligation is the equivalent of 1/3 of a shekel a year. Now, this is not the modern day Israeli shekel, but it's a shekel of biblical times. And 1/3 of a shekel is actually 10.1 grams, about 1/6 of an ounce of fine silver, the current value of which is around 3 to 4 pounds. So basically, if you put 3 or 4 pounds in the tzedakah box on the day of Rosh Hashanah, you have fulfilled the minimum obligation of giving tzedakah for the year. However, This mitzvah of tzedakah is incumbent on all males and females above the age of bar bat mitzvah, but the 1/3 shekel minimum is really appropriate for someone who is so poor or is actually himself receiving tzedakah and is living on a subsistence level. A normal person who has food on the table, clothes to wear, etc., should give more than that. And they set out that, in fact, a good form or a good amount to give is 1/10 of your money or your income. And a better way is actually 1/5, 20%. Income is defined as post-tax income, and it includes any increase in wealth over the year. So if you have investments, they increase in value, 1/10 of that increase should be given to tzedakah. And also the first year you are incumbent to give tzedakah, i.e. the year after your bar mitzvah, 1/10 or 1/5 of your total assets should be given in one go. And then beyond that, every year it's the increase in your assets is designated for tzedakah. Also, if you receive an inheritance, even though the donor, the person bequeathing the money, would have already given tzedakah on their assets, when you receive the inheritance, this is an increase in wealth to you, and you have to give tzedakah, you have to give your tithe, your 10 or 20% on that. Now, the maximum you should give is 20%. But Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said that the maximum can be ignored if it is to save lives, ransom captives, or build new buildings for Torah institutions. Most people work on the basis of 10%, and they refer colloquially to the money set aside for tzedakah as maaseh money, which means 1/10. So who is entitled to receive tzedakah? Who is entitled to ask for tzedakah? The rabbis in Shulchan Aruch set out that you have to, if you have less than 200 zuz to your name, then you're entitled to receive tzedakah. Well, how much is 200 zuz in real money? We know from the Passover Chagodah in Chad Gadya, we sing the song about the goat my father bought for 2 zuzim. So 200 zuz is worth the equivalent of 100 baby goats. But the rabbis also set out a monetary amount for the zuz. They say that a zuz is the equivalent of 3.5 grams of pure silver, and that amount was set up in temple times. So 200 zuz works out at about 700 grams of silver, which is equivalent to about 25 ounces of silver. At 19 pounds per ounce, the total of 200 zuz is therefore approximately 470 pounds. So someone with less than 470 pounds to their name would be entitled to receive a handout from a tzedakah fund. In practice today, means-tested benefits from the government the level is set at a much higher level. Now you can have several thousands of pounds when you're to be entitled for benefits. But as I say, in temple times, 470 pounds or equivalent was the amount you had to have in order to get tzedakah. The codes also set out the priorities on who you should give tzedakah to. So we have a phrase in English, charity begins at home. Well, that in fact forms part of the Jewish rules on tzedakah. So if you have to set out a list of priorities of who you should give to, the first priority is someone close to you, i.e. your relatives. Your relatives, your extended family will come ahead of your non-relatives. People living in your town or community will come ahead of people in other towns or countries. So, for example, if there was a needy person in Edgware, they would take priority over a needy person in Manchester or a needy person in Israel. Also, the intensity and kind of need. Priority to life-threatening needs, priority for those requiring food over those requiring clothing. So obviously the priority of what is the money needed for more urgently. The level of education. A Torah scholar takes precedence over a non-scholar. Sex. A woman takes precedence over a man. Lineage. A Cohen takes precedence over a Levi, who takes a precedence over Yisrael. And finally, an ordinary Jew takes precedence over a Mambas. So if you have a few people in front of you to give tzedakah to, Rebbetzin Cohen will take priority over Mr. Israel, for example, and etc., etc. Now, there are various questions which we may want to consider. Some of these questions came in my course. Should you give all your tzedakah money to one individual or organization, or should you spread it around several? Well, obviously, if you're giving a large sum away, you can easily split it up and give to several people. If you are very limited what you can give, there's no point. You're just giving £10 to charity, and that's all you're giving away. obviously it's better to give it to one person where it will have some use rather than splitting it into, I don't know, 10 P's and giving it to people, various people who wouldn't actually benefit from it. Can you ask for your money back? For example, if you gave a donation, I don't know, you gave a donation to a shul. You said to the shul, I want Ne'ilah, I want to have Pasicha on Ne'ilah. And here's a donation, X £1,000. Give me Pasicha on Ne'ilah. And the shul then don't give you that Pasicha. Can you ask for your money back because you've given it under false pretenses? Well, the answer is no. You've given it in good faith. For example, if you go to a school and say, I want to endow this room in the school, and I want you to give my child a place in the school. So you give your money, they endow the room, and your child doesn't get a place at the school. Can you ask for your money back? Well, no, you've given it already. You can't. What happens if, for example, there's an appeal for a school and your child's at the school, and there's a big appeal for fundraising, and you give a hefty donation to the school. The same day, your child is being very mischievous, naughty, bullying another child, I don't know, hitting another child, and gets expelled from the school. Can you say, can you stop the check? I want my money back. I'm not giving money to this school after you expelled my child. Well, if you gave the money in good faith, you can't ask for it back. Can a wife overturn her husband's decision about sudoka? So, for example, there's a fundraising appeal in a local community, and the husband's there, and he gets up and he gets so motivated by the appeal. He says, I pledged £10,000 to this appeal. He goes home, tells his wife, Goldie, I just pledged £10,000 to the shul appeal. And I said, what? You gave £10,000 away? You crazy fool, no, you get that money back. We haven't got £10,000. That £10,000 is for our son's bar mitzvah. You either get that money back or pack your bags and go. Well, obviously, shalom bayis, you can go and ask for your money back because your wife has overruled you. Are shul membership fees or school fees included as tzedakah in Jewish law? Well, we know in English law they are because they are charitable donations and you can get gift aid, etc. on it. But in Jewish law, a fee you have like that is not tzedakah. It's not tzedakah. It's a bill you have to pay. Can you give money to non-Jews? Can you give charity to non-Jews? Do you have to? Well, the law is, it's nice, a good thing to do. It's charity. It's a good thing to do. And it's for the sake of being, sort of communal relations, etc. You should give handouts to non-Jewish charities. But it doesn't form part of your tzedakah, because tzedakah in Jewish law, it refers to giving to your kin, your needy kin, i.e. people who are Jewish. So non-Jews do not form part of the under the umbrella of actual tzedakah in Jewish law, but it's a good thing to do. Can you give away all your money on death to charity to avoid inheritance tax? Yeah, that's a good thing. But can you give all the money away in charity on death and not give anything to your children? Well, the answer is no. The law is in halacha, 50% is the maximum you can give away on death. The other 50% has to be given away to your children. And as an aside, Jewish law dictates a different order of priority in giving away your inheritance than civil law. And one should have something called a kosher will, because in Jewish law, for example, a spouse does not inherit a husband, the children do. So therefore one needs to have a kosher will in order to get things done properly. And there's various questions which you may want to discuss. In my course, there were 123 questions on the laws of tzedakah. Some of them are quite straightforward questions, and some of them, of course, involved giving decisions on which rabbi said what and who do we follow, etc., etc. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and we will see you everyone next week again for the next session of Breakfast and Learn. Good morning, everyone.